All right, so a good morning again. Part of what we're trying to do here at the CAV Forum is provide a very wide range of topics that are relevant to, and I'll show a bit of bias, the users, the people in the fields, as I keep saying, the people who are being put into harm's way, and whether it is by virtue of the testing standards, the manufacturers, the component suppliers, as we have here, the procurement methodologies, the lessons learned, so to speak, as well. And part of that is then the training side and the drivers. We can build the best vehicle with the best components and the strongest steel, if you like. But if the driver doesn't have the skills and the mindset and the habits to be able to safely and successfully get those people from point A to point B, then the vehicle doesn't really matter. And so we're very excited today, and I'll introduce Daniel Hardy from Toyota Gibraltar Services, TGS. And TGS is a very large organisation for certain, but also a deliverer of training, driver training programs, particularly through with the UN. And so I thought it was really opportunistic then to have Daniel come up and speak about driver training, the program they do with United Nations, and some of these, again, lessons learned and some of the issues that will impact upon the ability of those people who are delivering sacks of rice or who are delivering medical supplies and services to those who need it, will be able to actually do that in the safest possible manner. So, Daniel, please. We're very excited to hear about your presentation.
All right, thank you so much.
How much time do I have? Sorry? Oh,
Okay, great. Sweet, excellent. Hello, everyone. I've had an opportunity to meet quite a few of you, and some I've met before, and others I just met in the last couple of days. It's always impressive to see the breadth of experience, right, that's out there, and I certainly don't want to be standing up here and suggesting I know it all, which I don't, for sure. Particularly when it comes to CAV. It's a very interesting subject, as we saw, I think, in the last talk. But I wanted to give you, hopefully the benefits of my experience for the last 10 years delivering the training. And I think what's interesting about this is it started from the end user. It was in the field when we started the training program. So it's from the field, developed by the folks in the field for what we felt we needed. For the last 4 years, I've been doing it with Toyota Gibraltar, and previous to that with the UN, where the program actually started in 2015 for CAVs, 2014 for light or soft skin. I'm a Canadian, and just a bit of my background. I spent 14 years in the Canadian Army as an armor officer, and then about 7 with NGOs, 8 with the UN, and now a lovely 4 with Toyota Gibraltar. My first experience with CAVs came when I was still with the NGOs. We were deploying a CAV to Mogadishu, and I think we were one of the first. And I thought, I'm an armor officer, I know all this stuff. And then I started taking a look at it in detail, and I thought, wow, I really don't know much about this, right? So it was a steep learning curve on that side, just procuring something and deploying it. At that time, knowing NGOs, we didn't have a lot of resources, so there wasn't any training that we could get. But very quickly, I moved on to the UN, where we did actually have some resources. So we're operating the CAVs, both for training and on convoys and operations. And very quickly we saw we're going to have a problem if we don't make sure the drivers can get us to where we need to go safely, efficiently, less wear and tear, and in good time, and hopefully a bit comfortably for the passengers in the back. Because from a humanitarian perspective, what you're trying to do is get people somewhere so they can do their jobs, and hopefully you're not going to bang them up too much on the way in and So I'll just, the way I'm going to structure this is from a systematic approach to training. So we start with the analysis, go into the design, development, implementation, and evaluation. This is how we developed in the first place. Definitely a lot of this stuff came out as we were doing it because it's a continuous improvement model, sort of Kaizen, Toyota approach, but constantly trying to make it better, making sure that it is, fit for purpose and it achieves the aim. So our aim was to get people safely and efficiently, comfortably where they needed to go, right? And so the first thing we did in terms of analysis was to say, all right, what is the problem? What do we need to do? What are our resources? And so from a humanitarian perspective, looking at the incident data, we went back 5 years to take a look at what we could see. We quickly saw that the vast majority of casualties were from road crashes, from losing control, not from kinetic events, right? So that suggested to us that what we really needed to focus on was making sure that we could do that safely. And so that was a question then of what are these incidents, what's causing them? So in terms of a 5-year evaluation of the UN crashes, looking at all the CAV incidents that occurred, 78% of the casualties were from single vehicle crashes. That's loss of control, typically rolling, often with no other road user involved. So right away that suggested, this is something that we should be able to prevent, right? Single vehicle, they get in trouble, not sure what to do, and then something happens. So how do we address that? The other thing we noticed as we looked into it was very, very high operating costs. So it's a very expensive asset, as we all know. Then it gets deployed to the field, and then things go wrong very quickly. A lot of people aren't aware of what they need to do in terms of managing that vehicle, in terms of preventative maintenance, scheduled maintenance, storage, all of the things that most of us know, but certainly the end users often struggle with. So there was a key aspect that we wanted to incorporate. In terms of operator skills, so what's the audience? What do they know before they actually come? And I know there's hard to see here, but we took a group of 200 drivers that we'd done threshold assessments on. So before they've done anything, what do they know and what are they able to do? And I think it's quite interesting if you look at some stuff like, knowing how to just check a tire, right? And we can see there's around less than 10% could actually check a tire effectively, right? You know how it is. And as we know, when you go from a soft skin to a CAV, we've got different tires, right? Different pressures, and so on. So that's already a major issue. And certainly when you're looking at single vehicles, there's definitely tire bursts that are causes of some of it. And we could pretty much see why that was. Tire check. A number of things too. I mean, if you look at pre-driving checks, not including the tires, less than half could actually properly check a vehicle. And I'm talking, again, soft skin. And then you go to CAVs, is even worse. When you look at the actual skills that they have or on the road and that, you can see right away that there's very, very, very few of them have any idea of looking far ahead, systematically scanning, or are able to then translate that into a driving plan. Now, as we all know with CAVs, you need a bit more time if you want to do it smoothly and efficiently to plan your control inputs, right? It doesn't respond like a soft skin. So if the drivers are not looking far enough ahead, they don't have the time to actually implement that. And if they're going at a high speed and now they're doing a harsh control input, you know what happens often when that goes on. So we could see already that the driver audience that we were getting in the humanitarian section was coming often with very, very low basic threshold skills. So we had to incorporate that into what we were doing as well. So it's not just, get on the track and do the fun stuff. Resource constraints, we know there's a lot now, but there's always some, right, in terms of the country offices and what they have. So we saw that it was important for us to look at a training of trainers approach rather than saying, you know, we're going to fly around the world and some Canadian dude's going to teach you how to do it, right? So operating a training of trainers is a different beast. There's a lot of extra stuff you need to do, and you need to have that quality assurance that it can be done. So that was an add-on that came in 2016, 2017 as we started to see the issue in terms of resources. There's also language constraints, which also then feed back into having a training of trainers approach. Often the driver's semi-illiterate. Even if English or French is the primary language, they're more comfortable in their local language. If you get into Asia, you have a lot of different languages out there. And so if you want to do a good training, you have to have a conversation with folks. And trying to do it through a translator is very time consuming and often ineffective. So what we wanted to do was invest in the national staff and make sure that they can continue. Because the other aspect is if you train the international, they're there for 2-3 years and they're gone. And then there's nothing. Now you've hired a new driver, what do you do? And you've got resource constraints and language constraints. And that was aspect of the training methods and curricula. So I approached this as a security advisor with UNICEF. So I did not want to do a training program. I wanted to find something that I thought would address these issues. When I looked out at what was available at the time, I couldn't find anything that would fully satisfy what we wanted to do. An example of what was going on at the time, you can see in the video if it plays. There you go. This is in Somalia. It's an AV training. 30 people to one trainer who doesn't do any actual driving, sits out and tells them what to do, and they stake it out, and then they do their usual stuff. I have multiple videos of different trainings like this that I've picked up over the years. In fact, I've been playing this, and last year I met the driver. He came up to me and he goes, "That was me," and I went, "Oh, how are you?" "No, I'm good." Anyway. So we said, look, I mean, for what we were looking for, we're not talking about heat training. We're not talking about, all of that aspect. We want safe, efficient, comfortable, and that meant getting on the roads and doing it in the real conditions, right? Not on an artificial track, because you're not getting any of the hazard perception side of it, and then able to then implement it in a real situation. So we said, look, we're going to have to do it ourselves. So we started. And we made a lot of mistakes along the way. So I'm not suggesting that what we have today was what we rolled out. There was issues with, duration. You come up with a plan. Is it long enough? Is it too long? Is it too high? Is it too low? Are we addressing everything we need? We simplified. As I think everyone knows, the more you know about something, the harder it is to know what someone needs to know, right? Because you see everything. So we're cutting, simplifying so that we get to the point where it's what they need to know to do their jobs effectively. And if they're interested in something else, you can have a sidebar conversation, okay? Looking at the task, right? Because driving is a behavioral-based thing. It's a self-directed task. When the driver's in the vehicle, they're doing what they are doing, and they're driving how they feel. So when we're taking that into account in terms of what do we need to include, this was a key process. So at the top, we've got the organization. The organization is deciding when people are going, what they're driving, if they do get any training, what the policies and procedures are for how long you're on the roads, and all of that. How do you check a vehicle? Who is checking that? So right away, the organization plays a big role. Obviously, we can't affect necessarily what the organization does, but we can help the drivers understand where there are some issues and at least some ways to mitigate, as well as try to advocate with the organization about aspects of management. Then we have the driver themselves. So what's going on in their life and how is that affecting what they're doing on the road, and raising their awareness of that so that they can mitigate what they're doing, right? Classic one, you got in a fight with your significant other, and that's on your mind. You're not looking at the road, and that's going to run into trouble, right? So how do we make sure the driver's aware of that? make sure they're reflective of that, and they can recognize when it's happening and adjust their behavior. Context of the journey is a huge one. Obviously, if you say, look, you need to get from point A to point B, you've got all the time in the world. It's a nice, relaxing drive. If you say you're 10 minutes late, it's a completely different drive, right? Because of the time pressure and everything else that's going on. So making sure the driver's aware of that so that they don't let that affect their behavior on the road in terms of the vehicle and often how they approach risk, right? You see the speeds come up and so on. Then we obviously have the road. So getting on the road, making sure that you can interact with other road users in a safe and effective way. Now, a lot of the places that we operate and our clients operate, it's very chaotic, right? There's no rules necessarily. Things are going all over the place. So that's super important then to go out there and actually go through and make sure that they can safely navigate through all those hazards. And then last is the control. So actually controlling the vehicle. So understanding how to actually make sure it remains stable whenever you're doing something. But when we look at CAV as opposed to LV, we do see that there is more aspects and more time that you need to spend on the dynamics and on actually how to effectively control that vehicle and make sure it's stable. So that's the difference, main difference between soft skin and CAV for us is more time spent on that. In terms of development, so we get to the point where we think we're happy with the design, we understand our methodological framework and the methods that we're going to employ. It's then how do we communicate this effectively? So I mentioned before, there's a lot of drivers out there that are semi-illiterate or illiterate or aren't very familiar with the main languages, the official languages. So it's a question of translating things. It's a question of trying to make sure things are as visual as possible. So what we did, and this wasn't right away, but what we did is we hired a graphic designer who had experience working in the humanitarian field. We put him on a course. We trained him to be a trainer, and then we had him assist us on a couple of courses. So by that time, he really understood the audience. He'd seen the different drivers and what they were like and where they were coming from, and he understood the key messages so that then he could go back and start designing the different aspects of how we communicate what we're doing. There's also the assessment. It's a qualification for us. It was very important. It's not just a pass. You want to say this person is qualified. They met the standard and they can go and do it. So developing that assessment rubric and the strategy on that, it took us a long time to get to where we really needed to be in terms of what we needed to check. Other aspects that we showed or implemented, demonstration drive is very important, right? So you've talked about everything you want to do. The trainer needs to then show everything that they're expected to do on the road, right? From the pre-drive checks to the driving to the post-drive reflection. That means the trainers need to be able to effectively communicate. They need to be able to use instructional commentary, ask questions, say what they're going to do, understand when they need to stop and have a discussion and carry on. Because as you know, if you're trying to explain something as you're driving in traffic, it can be quite challenging, particularly in some of the locations that we're at. So that took quite a bit of time to work on and get to the point we're happy with. And what we do is we now give the driver a sheet of all the things that they're expected to see from the trainer. And they have to tick off when they see it, when they're happy with it, and so on. So it gives them a bit of power and to make sure that they question the trainer if they didn't see it or they're not sure about it, but also that they don't come back at the end, because if you don't pass, it's always the trainer's fault. So the driver comes back and says, "You never showed us this." Well, you signed off and said I did, so what's the problem? There's a bit of that. Obviously online, that came in with COVID, as we saw, I'm sure we all saw, now online training. So taking theory and putting it into an online format from an in-person format is challenging because it's a completely different way of communicating. So there's a lot of work going into how do we communicate these things to someone who's doing a self-paced approach. So not too much at one time and a lot of visuals and questions and so on. And then setting it up so that we can translate it in any language we need. So with the work of our colleagues in Fleet Services, TGS, we've got to that point where if somebody says, I want it in Bahasa, it doesn't take very long for us to convert everything into Bahasa so it's available, or any language. They've got me speaking Swedish and Mandarin, and I don't know what I'm saying, but it sounds like me, so hopefully it's good stuff. Then we get an implementation phase where you meet reality and it normally slaps you about. So getting into the field, you've got your lovely design, you think you've got everything great, and then you arrive and you see that you have, in the case of this one here, that's in Juba. So the only place that we could find to do anything was between the perimeters of the peacekeeping camp. Just one long straightaway. Fortunately, there was a tree, so we had a bit of shade. And that was what we had. Okay. Then you've got Thailand, beautiful track and facilities, lovely, you know. So you're constantly having to adapt. Port-au-Prince, it was just in, you know, the warehouse area, you know, and trying to make sure we could do things. So there's the aspect of the venues and the context that you need to address. Then there's when you meet the participants. So I have a strong memory of one of the first CAV trainings I was doing. I was in Nairobi, and we had the conference room on the second floor of Yunnan and the UN. And I see a South Sudanese colleague, you know, big, tall lad, and he's going up the stairs like this. I think, you know, I think there's a problem. So we sent him to see the medic, and it turned out he had a hairline fracture of his leg. But he was damned if he was not going to miss that training, right? So he came anyway, all right? So we've had issues with that. We've had people that swear they're good to go, and then you ask them, what does that sign say over there? And they go, what sign, right? So incorporating, you know, the vision test. I mean, assumptions, we all know you're never supposed to make assumptions, but there you are. You do make some. You think, yeah, they're going to speak the language. They're going to be medically fit. Often it doesn't happen as we'd like. In terms of the selection of candidates, particularly if it's outside of a location, often, you know, it's who likes who and who wants to give someone a little bit of an opportunity to go out. So then you have someone coming on a CAV training that's never going to drive a CAV, you know, but they're getting some cash. So we spend a lot of time working with the clients, and when I was in the UN with the other organizations or country offices saying, here's the profile, here's who you need to send, don't send that person, please. And sometimes we were lucky, and other times we were not. And then there's the issue of footwear. So we go through a cockpit check, and normally, you know, security, gear, get your seat. So the person's going security, gear, seat, shoes. Shoes? Yeah, you can't drive with your shoes on. You have to take your shoes off. And they've kicked the shoes, you know, pretty much underneath the accelerator. I'm like, okay, that's not going to work. So, you know, you've got to be prepared to react to whatever you've got. In terms of the vehicles themselves, when we get out there, you've often got multiple different designs. Often there's no information on who designed it, who manufactured it. There's no operator's manual. The equipment's gone, and you're just presented with a vehicle that you then have to figure out, you know, the handling dynamics of it. You have to figure out, you know, if there's any additional add-ons, what they do, and so on. Tires are obviously a big one. I think I think there's a talk about it later, so I don't want to go into too much detail. But I was in Haiti last year. We looked at the VR7, and I talk in PSI, Canadian Imperial. They had it at 26 PSI on a VR7. So basically, it was on the run flats, right? And I said, do you understand the tire pressure? Yeah. But it's too low. No. If you put too much pressure, it's not comfortable. So they're deliberately doing that. In other cases, we've got armored vehicles, CAVs, where there's no information on what the tire pressure should be. I've seen CAVs where there's the original OEM Toyota tire pressure, and they haven't replaced it. And there's no operator's manual. And we know that there are differences, you know, depending on who it is. You know, the storing the vehicles out in the sunshine. You know, you've got the the country director's lovely Prado in the shade, and the 3 VR7 sitting out in the hot sun, because they only get used once in a while, right? So no real understanding of how to use them, how to maintain them, and so on. In terms of equipment as well, just throwing stuff in the back, and the jacks are missing. We had a flat at one point, and there wasn't a heavy-duty jack, so we had to go around begging for one. So when you get out in the field, it's always interesting to hit reality and try to navigate. You got to be very flexible. You can't show up and think that everything's going to be hunky dory. Yeah. And then often we have a situation where there isn't that many CAVs, so they want soft skin plus CAV at the same time. So then we're jumping back and forth. Another issue that we learned that was really important in terms of dynamics and track-based was making sure that we had a soft skin version and the CAV, and move people back and forth, so they really understand the differences in dynamics. Because if you just have the CAV, they're like, yeah, okay. But if they've gone through the forward slalom in a soft skin, and now they've moved to the CAV and they've tried to do the same thing, they quickly realize, wow, I can't do this, right? A lot of time as well on reversing, keeping the speeds down, right? Because as we can see from the video, there's a lot of that. There's that tendency to really hit it, go fast, and then crank the wheel, and then you're running into troubles. So maintaining a steady speed where you can then put your control inputs in is obviously very important. We do like a 3-year cycle as well, because it's habits, behaviors. People get lazy, right? That's what we do. So you get trained up, you're like, okay, I know how to do, and then 3 years later, it comes down. So that refresher side is very critical. So having a small group, just the people in the car with the trainer, so they can have conversations, coming back and making sure that the behavior is there, or we can bring that behavior back, we can adjust the habits. Making sure that self-reflection is a critical component, because what we want at the end is the drivers to be able to learn from experience, and if they don't know how to self-reflect, they're never going to learn. You get a driver who's been driving for 20 years and they've got all kinds of bad habits, and they don't recognize any of them, right? Because no one ever actually thinks, how did I do, right? And if something does happen, it's the other person's fault, so it's never your fault. So we spend a lot of time as well going in and having that conversation. So that drive, what went well, what didn't go well, what could you do better? What are you going to do to keep working on it, so they can continue to improve afterwards. That's the idea, but it's human behavior at the end of it. So you can do everything you do, they can get to that standard, but it's up to them at the end of the day if they go away and just let everything go. Hopefully something will remain. We try to work with organizations to say, you need to reward good behavior, you need to follow up and keep those messages going, but sometimes the management changes or they're not interested. So it's very hard sometimes to maintain safe driving behavior in those situations. In terms of evaluation, spent a lot of time on that, and as I said, a lot of lessons learned and so on. So part of it was going out and getting a external accreditation and assurance. So it's not just us making things up or congratulating ourselves. What a great job we did. It's getting someone else to actually have a look at it and say, adjust this, adjust that, and so on. So that was important. But every year we go through that cycle of evaluation, looking at what were the surveys of the people. What did they like? Were they enough people able to meet the standard? Were they actually using it after the training, and what kind of impact do we see? Because the training isn't just the end, it's a means to an end, right? So what is the impact, which is quite difficult to do at times, particularly for external trainers, because you don't have control, you don't necessarily have access to data. So it's working with clients to make sure that we can do that level 3 or level 4 evaluation. Just to give you an example, because I had access to this when we brought the program out in Jordan where we started it. The blue is as we train drivers. So you can see in the early years it wasn't a lot of trainers, and as we started to qualify a few more trainers and put in a more systematic approach, then we see a big increase in the number of drivers trained. So this is all UN agencies operating in Jordan. If we went back to even 2012, 2011, you would see there's an average of about 3 fatal or serious casualty crashes per year for the UN. And, you know, you've got the minor crashes are not necessarily indicative because there's only certain organizations that report them. A lot of the time, drivers don't want to lose their safe driving bonus, so they fix it themselves or whatnot. So sometimes you don't have a great view on minor crashes and definitely no near misses. But from the data we could see, what we saw is once we hit a critical mass with the drivers trained, what we saw is 2018, 2019, for sure, no serious or fatal casualty crashes. 2020, we know COVID, so there wasn't really much driving, so I wouldn't, jump on it. But we did see that decrease. So we could say that we had some kind of impact in that. I can't say it's all. It was the only road safety intervention that was being done at the time, but there's all other factors that are out there, and you can't prove a negative. But certainly we feel that what we were doing was having an impact. And interestingly enough, I then presented this to the powers that be, and I said, look, we're saving money, right? We're saving lives. And they went, yeah, okay. And that was it. Because it didn't happen, so no problems. I think maybe in this environment now, people might be a little more focused on if we're saving money and if there are interventions that can save the organization's money and certainly lives. I would add, not for Jordan necessarily, but for the UN as a whole, the ratio of UN casualties to civilian casualties was 1 to 4. So if you look at all the UN casualties that occurred, and then you multiply that by 4, right? That's the number of civilian casualties. So it's far more. So road safety is a critical aspect of all that we do, or they do. Yeah. So that's pretty much a quick, hopefully a quick journey through some of the recollections or reflections that I had on the last 10 years. But I think it's always interesting to have questions, right? So rather than me tell my war story or peace stories, I'd like to open it up for questions if anyone has any burning.
Well, as usual, John, as usual, I'll start off. And one of your comments towards the end certainly struck a nerve in the concept of the management buy-in, the concept of, well, a problem hasn't happened, so we really don't need to worry about it. It's a bit like the thought occurred of, it's coming up to the flu season. So, I haven't had the flu, everything's fine, I don't need to be inoculated against the flu, and then all of a sudden you get it and it's, oh my gosh. Yeah. And it's a little bit a function of training, whereby if you don't have the accidents and things are working well, we become a little lax in our focus upon it. So any other reflections about communicating with senior management and being able to sell them that the dollar spent today will actually save the $2 more tomorrow in this environment where the dollar today, I just don't have the dollar. I've got to buy a sack of rice and I just don't have the money to send someone on a training course.
Yeah, great question, Rob. I think what's really nice about fleet management in general is it's very data driven. I mean, you can get a lot of data, right? You can know what the mileage is. You can look at driver behavior. You can see all kinds of things. So if you do an intervention, you should be able to then see and quantify the impact, right? And that should be of interest. What we've seen a lot of the time is people bought these great fleet management systems. They got all kinds of data, but they don't actually do anything with it because the folks in the field are too busy, right? And certain organizations do it very well, and they've spent a lot of time in the last sort of 5, 6, 8 years to bring that along. And that is, I'm seeing as having an impact on the executive level in terms of their priorities. But when organizations don't do that, it becomes a lot more difficult. And I was having a conversation with someone about the cost of a crash, right? So in the UN, everything is diversified in terms of where the money is coming from. So no one is feeling necessarily all the pain. If you have a crash and you've totaled the vehicle, or even if you've significantly damaged a CAV, that's a significant cost. Now you've got injuries, you've got legal issues, you've got to replace people, often you've got to rent or buy a new one, and so on. And if somebody's been significantly injured or killed, or an animal, whatever it is, there's often a price where you're operating, as I think we know. That's 3,000, it's 10,000, whatever for that. So all this money is going out is quite diversified, and people aren't sort of seeing the impact. What we did in terms of looking at just the direct upfront costs for a soft skin, I'm not even talking CAV, it was $88,000 on average for a soft skin serious crash where it's either written off or there's casualties, and about $8,000 for a minor crash. So if you say we can reduce that by 10%, 15, 20%, you're getting a significant savings. But again, it comes down to organizational culture. So when I show that slide, you know, the organization's at the top. That's where it all starts. So organizations that have folks, you know, you got Roman from ICRC that's sitting there focusing on this stuff and trying to make sure that there's a system in place and people understand it and there's buy-in. That's effective. You have other organizations where you just don't see that. And the other issue I've seen in terms of the UN and in the humanitarian world in general, people that get to the top of operations typically come from a finance background, right, or procurement. They're not fleet. They don't really know much about that. And they're just looking at policies and everything else. So when you, and I had this experience, so I after 5 years of doing it in the organization I was with, I went and said, look, this is the impact. Here's a 5-year plan. We're going to reduce it by at least 50%, right? Not going to cost us very much. And if we do 50%, we're going to be saving money. And they didn't buy it. Well, they didn't buy in. And I think the primary reason was the person in charge wasn't getting any heat from the top. And all they saw was extra work, right? Why would I get anything out of it? You know? I said, yeah, but we're killing a lot of kids, you know? Well, what can you do? That's just the price of operating. You know, there's these ideas. And the other thing with driving is everyone's a driver, so everyone's an expert. So they you know, they don't necessarily see an issue with, and they often don't understand why you need to train a driver. It's a professional driver. Well, most of the drivers either bought their licenses or paid someone off and so on anyway. So they were picked up and there's a buddy and so on. So there's that constant sort of hitting senior management and executive with, you know, the cost of what we're doing, how we could save. I thought the sort of the moral one would work, but interestingly enough, it didn't seem to have an impact. And it was a hot potato, so everyone was throwing it around. So yeah, it's a difficult one. I think now though, maybe people are a little more focused on it, but we'll see.
It's a challenge, and when you're talking about the large, diverse organisations such as the United Nations, it certainly is challenging. Any other comments or questions from the field? No? All right. Okay, no. I'll come up here. All right. Look, Daniel, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
It's one of those things, a bit like electricity. You know, it happens and you just don't really understand it. I'm sure the engineers do. I'm not an engineer in that regard. It just happens, it turns on, and you know, you get into the vehicle and people drive, and you expect to get to the end point at the end of the journey. It's not quite as simple as that, and so thank you for the very detailed review of how you approach it, and hopefully this will lead to organisations thinking more about investing the dollar today for the dividend of $2 tomorrow. So on behalf of the CAV Forum, to say just a small gift to say thank you very much for being here. Appreciate it. I'd like to thank you.
Thank you, Rob.